If you want to go fast in an all-wheel drive car, you need to learn the zero countersteer drift, or else you'll be slow. Let me explain. Because these big lumps of all-wheel driven goodness have so many moving parts, this makes them heavy, so slowing down and getting turned into a corner can be a bit of a hassle. Then when you eventually try to power out of the turn, the front wheels are not only going to be steering, but accelerating at the same time. This is too much for the tyres to handle and you'll end up understeering. So unless you're driving off-road or doing a 0 to 60 test, all-wheel drive cars will, in general, be far slower than rear-wheel drive. We need to employ a special technique, one that will allow us to carry more momentum into a turn by braking less, and one that will point us towards the apex of the corner sooner, so we have a straighter shot out of it, totally removing any need to turn the wheel and initiate understeer. This is the zero countersteer drift. Now, on paper, and in the minds of Subaru fanboys, this technique will always be faster. And it makes sense. We chuck the car into the corner, using the tyres to slow us down gradually instead of braking beforehand. Sure, we may absolutely melt the faces off our tyres after a few laps, but we're also not going to be doing any endurance races in these puppies, are we? Then we use the drivetrain's brilliant acceleration to pull us out of the slide without ever needing to steer. We see this all the time in rally, even on tarmac, so it must be true. Well, maybe not, because you see, a lot of things in motorsport work on paper, such as the fastest car on the planet, the Supra, being faster than an F1 car when you fit it with the same tyres. It just doesn't work in sim reality. Anyway, the same is probably true for the zero countersteer drift. Although it's a fun idea that drifting could be faster, many people doubt this. And you know what's coming, there's only one way to find out. We need to put this to the test. I'm going to pitch drift and full grip against each other in an epic battle on 4 types of corners. Firstly, the sweeper, then the hairpin, the square, the slightly bigger sort of hairpinny thing, but 2 of them this time. And hopefully we should get a decent insight into which is fastest, grip or the zero countersteer drift. But first, I want to tell you a story. Last night, I was playing some BeamNG, doing some drifts in my Veilside RX-7, when suddenly an NPC absolutely T-boned me. Then, for whatever reason, I suddenly got the urge to watch Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. So I searched it up on Netflix, but it wasn't available in the UK. However, it was listed at the top of the page, which meant it was available, just in a different country. So I booted up Surfshark VPN and set my location to Frankfurt, Germany. Then, as if by magic, I refreshed the page and Tokyo Drift appeared. Surfshark is an app and browser extension that allows you to place your devices anywhere in the world. It really is like magic. But that isn't all it does. If you're on one of those dodgy websites trying to find new mods and are dubious about which of the 1000 download buttons is the real one, just load up Surfshark and download safely. I know what you're thinking, all of this magic must come at a hefty price. Well, not in the slightest. In fact, there's a special offer for you sim racing blokes. Secure your privacy with Surfshark and enter coupon code TSRB for an extra 3 months free at surfshark.deals/TSRB. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back onto that test, shall we? As expected on the sweeper, the drift nudges ahead at the start due to not needing to slow down as much. But halfway through the turn, it begins to lose momentum and the slide ends. He's pointed at the apex, but due to the high speed of the corner, the car just simply doesn't have enough power to launch out of it. All-wheel grip has been building momentum since the turn-in point, so it takes the lead before it even reaches the apex, and drift is left in the dust on the following straight, and is probably wondering why Initial D lied to them. Now, the hairpin. Both cars have to slow equal amounts before turn-in, but when entering, the grip car has to adhere to the limits, meaning they can't yet get on the throttle, whilst the drift can go slightly over the limit and carry more momentum. This gives it a solid lead by the halfway point, and because it's already pointed out of the corner whilst the other is still turning, it can enjoy a lovely fast exit with a substantial lead, making it 1 apiece. The square corner is one that surprised me. Despite being high speed like the sweeper, the drift car actually manages to stay ahead until way after the apex. But again, it doesn't have the power to accelerate out of it with the high speed it's already travelling, meaning the grip pulls ahead onto the straight 2-1 to grip. The not quite hairpinny but kind of hairpinny consecutive turns are a pivotal point for our test. Will grip solidifies lead and grasp victory, or will the drift car pull things back and make it even? Let's see. Grip takes an early lead into the first corner and even pulls out well ahead. But again, the drift is far more suited to exit out of these corners due to the low speed and the straighter drive out of them. Then it's neck and neck going into the second turn. And while Grip is slowing, Drift chucks it in to gain the lead. And it's a tight one, but Drift has to come out on top. Let's see if he can hold it down the straight, and yes, Drift pulled it back. 2-all. Not managing to find a winner on all these different types of corners, it doesn't look like there's much to separate them. We need a practical test. One that will surely determine the zero countersteer drift's viability in sim reality. We need a race. So here we go, and Drift already has a substantial lead over Grip. Obviously, drifting has everything to do with that launch off the line, and it is still retaining the lead, increasing it even through T1, but it looks like Grip's got a pretty decent launch. It's neck and neck, as you can see the cars morphing inside each other there as we come down into T2, and Grip has taken a massive lead there, but Drift might nip back with a decent launch, cutting the corner a bit there. This is a great race, even if the cars are floating inside of each other, and coming down onto the straight now, coming down to the double hairpins, and Grip has a pretty decent lead. There's about a car length between them. Let's see if Drift can put it back. I'm hopeful. This is where Drift shines. These hairpins, always taking a bit of a wide line there. That is dodgy, almost running off the track. We've got one hairpin left. It looks like he's setting up for a decent launch. Let's see what he can do. No, he just doesn't have the power to accelerate out at that speed. It looks like he's trying to press too hard. 2 corners left, very fast. I don't think Drift is going to be able to come back from this. Sending it very hard, you can see he's pushing the car to its very limits, but that is that, and it looks like the Grip car has won by a decent margin there. So what the hell just happened? Given our singular corner test results, Drift was close enough by the hairpins to claw back to get a victory. But instead, Grip's lead only increased. And well, it's not rocket science. Its tyres were overheating from drifting every corner previous. So when it tried to drift the hairpins, it just didn't have enough traction to accelerate out of the corners like a rocket. Now I know at least one Subaru fanboy is typing up a comment longer than the script of this video right now, telling me that I shouldn't have done this test in totally perfect conditions. I mean, the air was scorching hot and the track didn't have a single speck of dust on it. And yes, this is totally unrealistic. We mostly see practical drifting in either rally or toge, which, suffice to say, 99% of the time are some of the worst conditions you could ever drive fast in. By having a cooler air and track temp, overheating tyres won't be as much of an issue for drifting, and the Grip car won't have as much traction to play with. So, in theory, this should even the playing field a bit more and be a more faithful test. But, well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. While this race was certainly a lot closer, with about 1 car length between them this time, Drift still suffered a miserable defeat. So our final 2 questions are, why do rally drivers and toge drivers drift? And when should you actually use this technique? Well, firstly, the kind of counterintuitive thing about drifting is that it's actually far safer and more predictable. And believe it or not, once you get to a certain skill level, it's far easier to drift a road you don't know than to try and grip it. As rally drivers barely know what's ahead, whether it be obstacles or road conditions, it's a preference of most to have controlled oversteer than it be a surprise. Not because it's faster, but even if you do want to drift fast, and I'll teach you how in a moment, you still need a lot of grip. You'd be surprised at just how grippy professionally built drift cars are. And while the zero countersteer drift doesn't need huge amounts of grip to get into corners, it does need it to accelerate out of them, which is where you'll gain the most time performing this technique. And this is why, even in the bad conditions, by the time the cars got to the hairpins, the Grip car was still pulling away on the exit. So when should you actually use the zero countersteer drift? We've seen it works well on sharp corners, as long as you don't drift the corners previous, as you can huck the car in and get a very fast exit without risking understeer, which will cause you to lift off the throttle. So if there's a hairpin before a straight, for example, you might want to use this technique on it if you're desperate. It's a risky manoeuvre and quite hard to pull off on command, and if you do it too much, your tyres will overheat and you'll be slower even without drifting.